When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it was, now is not, and yet will come. Now it's interesting here because remember when we first started this lesson, we talked about the inhabitants of those names that are in the book of life. It said that they're already there at the time of God's creation. And here we hear it again. At the time of creation, everyone's name is in the book of life. So the angel tells John he will give him greater insight into the 7th bowl. And he introduces the scene in verses 1 and 2 by describing a certain woman who calls a harlot who sits on many waters. In verse 5, we learn that harlot is a symbol for the great city Babylon and its rule over the kings of the earth. Women are commonly used to symbolize religious systems in Scripture. Israel is called the wife of Jehovah, and the church is called the bride of Christ. And harlot is used here to picture spiritual Babylon because a harlot is a perfect representation of false religion. A harlot or prostitute is an illegitimate counterfeit wife who gives the illusion of a marriage without the substance or reality. So in that sense, a harlot is a fitting picture of idolatry, a false religious relationship rather than a covenant with the true God. But more than merely picturing idolatry, John is told that this woman, the great city Babylon, is the mother of all harlots. Babylon is not merely one of many harlots or false religions. She is the source, the beginning of the counterfeits. So here's a confirmation of what we observe in the rest of the Bible. The source of false religion is Satan, personalized by his home, city of Babylon. Notice the harlot sits on many waters, and the meaning of the water is explained later in verse 15. These waters represent the multitude of nations and people of the world, all of humanity, in other words. So if the woman sits on waters, then it suggests she is over them or dominating them. The world is under the deception of false religion, which finds its source in Babylon, the home of Satan. The angels say that the world leaders fornicate with her and that people became drunk in immorality. The enemy entices people to engage in false religion for a variety of fleshy reasons. Throughout time, world leaders have used religion to build a base of power, to enrich themselves, to control their subjects. They fornicate with the harlot in the same that they use her to their own pleasure and become partners with her. They become drunk by her immorality in the sense that they lose their sense as they come under Satan's influence. False religion is both a seductive and a stimulant, or a sedative and a stimulant. It stimulates the lust of the flesh for greater power, various lustful desires or other greed, and false religion sedates the mind, lulling a person into a spiritual stupor and taking them further and further away from the truth. So if we look at 2 Corinthians 4, 3 and 4, it says, And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is in the image of God. So then in verse 3, John is taken to see this harlot in a new and more mysterious form. In the desert wilderness, John sees a woman riding a red beast, full of blasphemous names and having 7 heads and 10 horns. This beast is the same as the first beast John saw back in Revelation 13. So let's look at 13:1. It says, The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. So we said the beast is an Antichrist, and in verse 8 we see confirmation that this is the Antichrist. He is the one who was, is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and the destruction, referring to his death and resurrection. And he is also the one the world will see and marvel over. And the beast is being ridden by the harlot, clothed in scarlet and purple and adorned richly. We know the woman is spiritual Babylon, the mother of all false religion and idolatry. She has existed long before the Antichrist, and in fact, we just saw her sitting on many waters, which are the kings of the earth. So Satan has been using false religion to control and manipulate world leaders throughout the ages. But now Babylon, the harlot, rides only the beast, and the Antichrist who rules the world. As Satan indwells this man, spiritual Babylon, the mother of idolatry, and the beast have become united as one. Which means that at the end of the tribulation, all world religion is vested in a single man, the Antichrist. No longer will there be many false religions, because now there will only be the worst, the beast. In that sense, the harlot is now riding the beast, since he is her owner. And the woman is clothed like royalty and adored with riches, because Satan requires the world to worship him by making sacrifice to his false religion. Remember when Daniel told us about that same person during that same time. So let's look at Daniel. Chapter 11, verse 36 through 38. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the God of his ancestors or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any God, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortress, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. So the Antichrist honors Satan by calling the world to sacrifice greatly to the cause of the New World Order, the New World Religion. The world lavishes the one false religion with great wealth, which honors Satan. And yet her judgment is assured, because the effect of spiritual Babylon has been to promote immorality and admirations to kill the saints. In verse 4, we're told she holds a cup of abominations and immorality, and it's as if she indulges in these kinds like a drink. She takes pleasure in them as if she is addicted to them. And in verse 6, John hears that she is drunk on the blood of the saints, which pictures the martyrdom of the tribulation, but also of earlier times. In effect, this scene tells the story of religion in all times. False religion is Satan's tool to enslave the world, bringing it into all manner of sin and using it to persecute the saints. And of course, the worst examples are so-called Christian false religions that Satan uses to discredit Jesus and the church. So this is spiritual Babylon, the system of lies and corruption Satan promulgates throughout the history of the world to counter the true God. In the final days of the age, all his schemes are vested in a single man, the Antichrist. Now John has given an answer to the meaning of the horns in the head of the beast, and the answer will explain how this beast relates to the fourth beast of Daniel 7. First, remember that we're learned already in chapter 12 and 13 that the dragon was Satan and that the beast was the Antichrist. The dragon had 10 horns and 10 heads with crowns. That indicated Satan was in control of the entire world, all its kingdoms and all its rulers. But the beast had 10 horns with 10 crowns, but only 7 heads with blasphemous names. And one of those 7 heads was killed and then resurrected. Now we get the rest of the story. So let's look at Revelation chapter 17. 9 through 14. This calls for a man with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast, who once was and now is not, is an eighth king. He belongs to the seven and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. So to have wisdom in the Bible's way of saying you must know history and the rest of the Bible, specifically the Old Testament. First, the heads are mountains, which it's itself a symbol of world rulers. And in verse 10, we get confirmation that these mountains are kings. It's off. How did that ring? There is no volume up. Okay. It's probably a triple sale and I'm ignoring it. Okay. Let me find out where I was. Okay. So, the angel is disguising these 7 kings from the 7 leaders who rule under the Antichrist. When the Bible uses mountains to stand for kings, it means kings of the highest authority. No one is higher. That means these 7 kings cannot be the 7 kings under the Antichrist because they are not the highest authority. Furthermore, the harlot will sit on these 7 kings. Remember, we learned earlier that the woman sits on the king of the earth. But once the Antichrist rises to power, she sits only on the beast. So if the harlot sits on these kings, they must have ruled before the Antichrist ever came to power. Then, in verse 10, we're told 5 of these 7 have fallen by John's day. 1 is in power in that day, and 1 has not yet to come. Clearly, we're talking about these kings appearing in a sequence over time. They don't rule at the same time, which is another indication that these 7 kings are not the ones who rule at the end. The 10 kings of Daniel 7 who rule in the tribulation are all in power at the same time. Later in verse 16, we're told that the 10 horns, not the 7 heads, represent the kings of tribulation. So these horns given their power to the beast, but in John's day they had not yet come to power. It would be 2,000 years or more before they come to power. But when they do, they will rule a very short time, an hour. So these 7 heads on the beast are different kings than those who rule under the Antichrist in the tribulation. Next, notice in verse 10, the beast himself is also one of the 7 heads, which means he is a successor to these other kings. And when he comes to power, he remains only a little while, referring to his 3.5-year reign in the second half of the tribulation. So that tells us these kings that rule one after another, not all at the same time. Next, in verse 11, we're told that the beast is not only a 7th, but also an 8th. In verse 11, John says he was and is not, which we know is in reference to the Antichrist's death and resurrection. So the Antichrist is also an 8th in the sense that he dies and then comes back to life. He was the 7th until he dies, and then when he resurrects, he is a charge again, as it becomes an 8th king. To understand the meaning of the heads of this beast, we need to go back to chapter 13 to take note of one important detail. So let's look at 13:2. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and mouth like those of those of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. So the beast of Revelation 13, which is the same beast we see here in 17, incorporated aspects of all 4 of Daniel's beast. It had parts of a lion, a bear, a leopard, and the 4th beast with 10 horns. So this beast represents the entire age of the Gentiles, culminating with the Antichrist rule of the world. The heads of the beast, therefore, must be supreme world leaders who ruled in this age. So we must look across all four of the kingdoms in Daniel's age